I want people to appreciate and understand the hard work of people who sometimes into the wind of oppression were able to help grow this sport to get to this point. I want people to also come away understanding the singularity of Caitlin Clark in this moment as well to maximize those things. Please come away from this understanding you don't have to accept the loudest, dumbest arguments as they relate to Caitlin Clark or women's basketball. Please understand that the players are not all out to get Caitlin Clark, while at the same time, they're maybe not the most excited to speak about how much they love Caitlin Clark to a reporter 10 minutes after you just had to go head to head against her 40 minutes. Please live within the gray area, number one. And number two, like, please find the joy in this. I've heard too many women's basketball fans say, I'm exhausted by the discourse. You don't even need the discourse.
He is the author of Becoming Caitlin Clark, the unknown origin story of a modern basketball superstar. We have the pleasure in welcoming back Howard Megdal onto Hoopsology. Welcome back.
Thanks, Justin. Good to be back.
Thanks for coming on to the show. Once I found out that you were writing this book, you're on the top of the list to have you back onto the show. So thank you for making the time. I know you're extremely busy just covering the sport of women's basketball. I think your site that you produce is really crucial at this time, just in terms of providing news to an audience that's craving women's sports. So I really appreciate your work.
I appreciate that.
Let's jump into the book, and I'm very curious with Caitlin Clark, currently in her sophomore season, and her story, at least in the professional ranks, has just begun. I'm just curious, why you thought this time was appropriate to write a book about her when her story has, in a lot of ways, just begun.
Well, there's a couple of reasons that I think are critical at this moment in time, and I think you're absolutely right that assuming good health and certainly hope for that for her, like with anyone, her story is still being written. And I expect there to be further books written about Caitlin Clark if she continues on this trajectory, especially. But what we are seeing now is a real tipping point moment in women's basketball. And there are two strands to it that I think are fundamental. And one is the way in which her rise has coincided with overall growth over the last 5 years that she has been at the center of, that she's been instrumental in supercharging. And then there is also, and I write about this within the book, a 100-year story, a more than 100-year story that is very specific to time and place. Caitlin Clark is fundamentally a product of her time and place in the last 5 years and the last 100 years. And I thought it was important to bring those strands together within a larger narrative for us to understand both where we are and also where we are going in that story to come.
Can you explain how not only the WNBA, but college basketball now in 2025 has laid the framework for a player of Caitlin Clark's caliber to really excel, not only on the court, but also her popularity as well?
It is fundamental to where we are now. And I just want to say this off the top because I think the conversation about Caitlin Clark gets derailed in a lot of corners where there are these two obvious complementary aspects of her growth that for some reason are treated as one or the other. There's either the quote-unquote great man theory of history, but in this case, the great man is Caitlin Clark, right? That Caitlin Clark is the only reason that we are seeing this growth in women's basketball at this moment, which doesn't make any sense. But the other thing that doesn't make any sense is this idea that, it could have been anyone, and Caitlin Clark just happens to be the one who's caught up in this moment as of now. And that ignores all the ways in which she has maximized every opportunity that this current moment has provided her in a way that we have just never seen before either. And so it's important, your listeners will be able to live within the gray area, that this idea that we can have these two ideas in our mind at the same time. But let's look for a moment at that moment at which she comes into public prominence. So she's a freshman in 2021. And just to set the scene, her first 10 games are not even on TV. I watched Caitlin Clark's first 10 games on my iPad on Big Ten Plus, which is a subscription-only service that I have because I'm, for my work and I'm a basketball junkie, but not a lot of people have. And people were not even in the stands to see it because we were still at the end of COVID restrictions at the start of her year. But by the spring of 2021, she, as a freshman, was not just on TV. Every every women's NCAA tournament game was on TV. ESPN is very proud of bragging about this now. I got this email ahead of the tournament. The 5th year in a row that every game is being broadcast by ESPN. And I was like, right, but you could have been doing that for decades. You're just doing it now. And so it's not necessarily something to brag about, but it coincides with Caitlin Clark's freshman year. Something else that coincided with the freshman year, they put Caitlin Clark's Iowa team facing a freshman named Paige Beckers on the UConn Huskies on ABC. So not just on TV, but on network television. And that drew 1.6 million viewers. And it was an on-ramp for a lot of people to understand what was to come. And in the subsequent years, we saw that continue to grow. We saw the NCAA tournament on the women's side use the March Madness branding. Again, this is one of these incredible self-owns by the NCAA. It took them being publicly shamed into using the branding they already owned to make more money for their own product. And prior to that, they were only allowing the men's tournament to use it. And 2023, not coincidentally, is a year that we saw Caitlin's audience continue to grow. Women's basketball's audience continue to grow as well. But again, you go back to, all right, well, is this Caitlin just being the beneficiary of circumstances? Well, no, because Caitlin went out in an Elite Eight game, in a Final Four game in South Carolina and scored 41 points to beat one of the best college teams I've ever seen, Aaliyah Boston's senior season South Carolina Gamecocks. She continually rose to the occasion and put on a show when a show was being asked of her. And that's just an incredible thing for somebody 19, 20, 21, 22 years old to be able to do with the incredible public pressure, to be the eye of this hurricane. And she was very much the calm within that storm around her, did it again and again. And by her senior year, the WNBA, which has long struggled to convert the college audience to the pro audience, made the decision to advertise on the NCAA tournament, which again was now entirely being broadcast on the ESPN. So you put all that together, and her audience moving from college to pro in the way that it has is not shocking. But again, it required her to go out in the Elite Eight game against Angel Reese in that LSU rematch and score 41 points and to put on a show every time she went out there. And to stay healthy, critically, was a critical part of this as well. So you build and you build and you build. And so you put those two things together and it creates the circumstances for the current moment.
Do your research while Caitlin Clark was in college. You see some other athletes that they get fame at an early age, and you see they have trouble coping with that.
Yeah.
I was curious, do your research, it seemed like Caitlin Clark extremely poised, extremely driven, and a strong support system to handle the challenges that come with just being a superstar athlete in this day and age. I'm just curious if you can elaborate on that, her just building that base to make sure that she's not distracted from what she's doing on the court and off the court in terms of her business ventures and really excelling in promoting her brand.
When I say she is a fundamental product of her time and place, she is coming from Iowa, where the female athlete in basketball has been celebrated for over a century. And so being from Iowa meant two things. One, when she played her first game as a freshman in high school at Dowling Catholic, it was on the front page of the sports section of the Des Moines Register. She's a public figure. She's 14 years old. She's a public figure. But it also meant that was normalized. And so she was as able to handle it as anyone. This was not a Freddie Adu situation, a Jennifer Capriati situation. This is a situation where a young person is being brought into a system that has already done this for a very long time. And then she just, in a lot of ways, exported this nationally and globally to the way in which women's basketball players have long been celebrated in her home state. And so it is a remarkable thing It is absolutely a remarkable thing, but it's also something in so many ways she was kind of born and raised to do.
Can you talk about just how Iowa celebrates not only basketball but women's basketball? Myself and my other co-hosts, we're either currently living or raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and there a very strong tradition of women's basketball, not only in high school but also in college. So, in some ways, I think Iowa is I think superior to New Mexico. No disrespect to my New Mexico friends and family. But I just feel like Iowa just has that stronger legacy. But I do know, just compared to other parts of the country, it is a rare thing for how the community celebrate women's sports, especially when I was being raised in the 90s. So I know the importance of that because, like, can you elaborate
Yeah.
specifically how Iowa really has developed that basketball culture centered around just women's sports specifically?
It's not an accident, and again, it comes from in ways that are remarkable to me that made me really want to write this book. Direct lineage to Caitlin Clark's own experience, right? So all over the United States, and we should probably start here. There is no reason for a gap between attention, investment, payment toward women's basketball and men's basketball. As soon as there was basketball, James A. Naismith invented the game in 1891. Women are playing it at Smith College in 1892. By 1896, Stanford and Cal are playing women's college basketball games in front of capacity crowds, people banging on the ceiling to try and get in. There was always an effort on the part of those who opposed it to push back. And this is the case in women's sports, and it's the case in, I would argue, feminism writ large. And so instead of nurturing the game, we saw colleges and then eventually high schools banning girls and women from playing basketball. And that distinction, by the way, I'm just using the AP distinction, girls through the end of high school, women college on, but that's where that phrase comes from. So by the early 1900s, first of all, you saw college basketball essentially from the women's side, strangled in the crib. And then when you looked at the high school level, in an effort to, protect women, which is the pretense used a lot of times by bad faith actors, but also in these moments being used by people who legitimately believed it. The pseudoscience of we can't have women running all the way up and down the court or they'll lose the ability to have children. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense like that was not just perpetuated, but widely believed at that time. And we saw girls' high school varsity basketball banned in 47 states in the Union. And in Iowa, where it had become very popular in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, there was an effort similarly made and was actually voted on, supported by 85% of Iowa girls' high school superintendents. But there was a brave group of minority voices, 15%, who said, not only we need to preserve this, but a guy named M.M. McIntyre said, if we ban girls basketball will be the train that runs us over. And so they went out and said, we're going to start our own. And it's called the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union. And as a result, two things. One, there was no period of decades where girls basketball did not exist. So the state tournament became a signature event. In fact, it was the first sporting event of any kind televised in Iowa by the 1950s. You also had people able to innovate on the court. They were playing a game called 6-on-6, which is originally going to, well, the girls won't have to run full court, and so we'll protect them. But what ended up happening was that you had 2 3-on-3 hyperspeed games, scores routinely into the triple digits by the time we got to the 1940s and 50s. And a lot of the innovations in 6-on-6 basketball led directly to the way Lisa Bluter coached at Iowa and the way Caitlin Clark ultimately played for Lisa at Iowa, along with Lisa's top assistant, Jan Jensen. Well, how did M.M. McIntyre know how great girls basketball could be? He had a woman named Dorcas Anderson who helped lead his team to the 1921 championship. They were the first dynasty. They were the dynasty of Iowa girls high school basketball in the early 1920s. Dorcas Anderson's granddaughter is Jan Jensen. I mean, Dorcas Anderson helped directly influence Jan going into basketball in her own right, becoming an incredible 6-on-6 star, scored 105 points in a game, starred at Drake under Lisa Bluter, ended up coaching under Lisa Bluter, and then succeeding her at Iowa over the past couple of decades, and helped shape the player that Caitlin Clark became. I mean, it just the ways in which it's not 6 degrees of separation. It's just this direct lineage to what Caitlin Clark is on and off the court. Absolutely a product of the state of Iowa.
From Caitlin Clark's career so far in the WNBA, how has the community of Iowa supported her? I think it's very obvious in terms of the fans making the trip to other cities such as Las Vegas when she's playing on the road. But I'm just curious, when the cameras are not focused on, Caitlin Clark's games, on the road, or when they're spotlighted in just the national media. I'm just curious other ways how Iowa's still supporting Caitlin Clark, even though she's moved on to the W.
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, excuse me. The lineage is something felt by everyone. So there are a couple of figures in the book that I write about who connect directly to what Caitlin Clark is and has become. So just to give you two examples, the Caitlin Clark of 50 years ago was Molly Bolin, now Molly Bolin Kazmer. And she was an incredible shooter, a product of 6-on-6, somebody who goes to the college game directly after Title IX, and had reasonable expectation that she would be able to play professionally to earn a living playing basketball. And ultimately, the limitations of the infrastructure around her at that time point to the difference between what has been possible for Caitlin and what was possible for Molly. But Molly has no bitterness about that. Molly has been a huge supporter of Caitlin. Molly sat with Caitlin's parents at the All-Star game last year, watching Caitlin perform as a rookie in Phoenix. And so, that kind of support permeates the state. Another group I wrote about in the book is the 1962 Van Horn Hornets. And they're important because they helped innovate the way in which Caitlin plays today. They are also important because of the way they were celebrated. The Van Horn Hornets came of age at a time where, for many decades, the Iowa girls high school champion would be the team that had the tallest girl, and they would feed her inside. And Van Horn had 6 girls all playing, no one taller than 5'5". But they had this innovative young coach who came about and said, we're going to build a different kind of game around, and see if this sounds familiar, Caitlin Clark fans, perimeter shooting and pinpoint passing. And they played a different kind of game. And a town of 551 people produced an Iowa State champion. And then the other part of that is that championship team had 3,000 people welcome them when they get back to Van Horn, and were celebrated in a way that is entirely familiar to anyone who's watched the crowd around Caitlin Clark today. And I say all that to say those 6 women have a group chat, and they watched every one of Caitlin's games in Iowa and talked about it. And they watch her here in the WNBA, and they watch Kate Martin as well. Kate Martin, the niece of Jan Jensen. I mean, the lineage is direct here. Like, you don't have to work hard to see where and how this comes from. And they love and adore this growth, and they are directly responsible for how we got here.
Caitlin Clark's currently in her sophomore season. She's encountered some challenges just in terms of injuries, and I think just her turnovers are up this season. Just kind of the typical highs and lows of this being a professional athlete. What has been your reaction to her sophomore season so far?
Well, she hasn't been consistently healthy, and that's the biggest thing to me. You compare her rookie years to the rookie years of Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi, who are the gold standards for playing guard in the WNBA, and she had better numbers, I would argue, on balance as a rookie than either one of them, which is to take nothing away from 2 of the best players I've ever covered or ever will cover.
Sure.
But when that's your floor, your ceiling is unimaginable. She's going to ultimately design her own ceiling. But she'd got to be healthy to do it. And so even just now, the Indiana Fever taking the extra bit of caution and making sure that she gets right before you bring her out back there. I mean, it matters for the Fever. The Fever are not a one-woman team. Anyone who has Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston and Natasha Howard and Lexi Hull, I mean, there's a lot of talent on that team, top to bottom. Michaela Timpson is excelling as a rookie. But they're not a championship team without Caitlin Clark healthy and performing at her best. And they know that. Everybody knows that. And so you have to get her healthy first and foremost. But out of the many things I wonder about the future, and there are many things I wonder about the future, whether Caitlin Clark is going to play at an elite level, as long as she's healthy, that ain't what I'm worried about.
No, I completely agree. Just going back to the book, it's been out for a little bit. Just curious, what has been the reaction from other readers? Was it what you expected, or did you get some surprise, just reviews and just thoughts on what you put out?
No, it's been so gratifying to have people come to me and say, we saw this, but we didn't know why. And that's what I really wanted people to understand, the how and the why of this. That's the difference between something I want to write a story about and something I want to write a book about, and being able to go in depth about all of this and make these connections for people. The fact that Carver Hawkeye Arena being filled to capacity, that's not even a new thing. That wasn't even Caitlin's idea or even Lisa Bluter's idea. You know, that was something that Vivian Stringer, the head coach at Iowa from 1982 to 1993, made a focus in her very first press conference. She didn't talk about, oh, we're going to go to the Final Four. She said, we're going to fill Carver Hawkeye Arena, and ultimately was able to do so by March 1985 in a game against Ohio State. And I had the privilege of spending the day with Vivian Stringer and talking to her for this book, and it was incredible. And she talked about just this moment where she's standing next to this young coach from Ohio State named Tara Vanderveer. I don't know whatever happened to her. Maybe she went on to win a couple of games in this sport. And just collectively, like those two, you know, with over 2,000 victories between them, looking out as young coaches and saying, this is what's possible for women's basketball. 40 years before, Caitlin made it an assumption in a way that has lived on after her for all the people who said, oh, it's just a Caitlin phenomenon. Well, maybe not when Iowa sold out every single home game in the year after Caitlin went to the WNBA. Maybe there's something bigger here than just one player. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And it's not, I think, not only with Aya, but also other WNBA teams with just the Valkyrie success, the expansion teams, just in terms of just the season ticket deposits, and even other sports too. I live in Denver. We're getting a women's soccer team that just announced a name recently. So it's exploding everywhere. With that also comes with labor negotiations. And I'm just curious, you know, the WNBA All-Star game recently happened as the recording of this podcast. Big discussions in terms of just the CBA. We saw the players wear the shirts from the Players Association. I just want to get your thoughts on how you think this is going to play out, especially now. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert on this, is we have other leagues that are alternatives within America with Athletes Unlimited and Unrivaled. Just curious how, and also internationally as well, just curious how all these are going to factor into just the labor negotiations in terms of how the players will get what they want in terms of their next labor deal.
Well, I remain bullish about the two sides' ability to reach an agreement in a relatively timely manner. The collective bargaining agreement will expire at the end of the season. I mean, technically October 31st. I think the leagues you talked about, I see them less as alternatives and more like additional leverage that the players have. Gotcha. That there's additional means of making a living where they don't even have to go overseas, although they can also go overseas. I think conflict of interest, which is a phrase that's been thrown around for Unrivaled, I think doesn't really capture it, because by that definition, literally every player who plays for an overseas team has a quote unquote conflict of interest, you know. And what I think instead is there's been some innovations. There's been, there's kind of the laboratories to help the league and players alike see what works, what doesn't work. It gives players an opportunity also to tap into a significantly increased revenue share. And I say that not as a percentage basis, although they're pushing for a higher percentage as well, but also the fact that revenue just is going up so significantly next year from media rights alone that there is, to my view, enough of a pot of money that I think it's very likely that you see the two sides come to an agreement. I think it's something that's really significant is Kathy Engelbert's relentless positivity that has come with this effort. And I've heard people make the comparison to the U.S. women's national team in soccer. And I don't think that comparison holds because the leadership of the WNBA right now is fundamentally different from the leadership from U.S. soccer. I remember I just wrote about this at the Nine, covering the 2019 parade after the women's national team won the World Cup in New York City. And Carlos Cordero gets up to the podium after this huge parade and this celebration and mispronounces Megan Rapinoe's name. And it's just like, you don't even have, I mean, if you watch the games, you knew how Megan Rapinoe's name was pronounced, and she was not a rookie. She was not new to the scene when this happened. And I remember walking away from that saying, this guy's not prepared for where the national team has gotten to. Kathy Engelbert has a really good rapport with the players. She was on Stud Buds. She's immersed in that world in a way that I think should help get a deal done as well. And the fact that she has not gone down a road of negativity, I think is fundamental to this. And I think it means, to use the phrase the kids use, that she understands the assignment.
Do you think she's misunderstood in her leadership position? I mean, I have been critical, but also I've talked to other journalists, reporters far more knowledgeable than myself, and they have expressed to me to really appreciate her positive and also exercise patience just in terms of how the league is going to be grown over the next few years. And I think we've seen that, even as myself being a strong critic of hers, just with the strong expansion of the league recently, and continuing that momentum. What are kind of the other misconceptions that you see that are not true about Kathy, you think?
Well, instead of the misconceptions, let me lay out the way I do see it, which is maybe a better way to do it. She took over a league that was on very financially shaky ground. She took control of a league just ahead of COVID, and a league that didn't have a CBA at the moment in July of 2019. She managed to secure labor peace, get the league through COVID, get the league to a point where it was able to expand in such a way that people are paying $250 million a piece for expansion franchises, secured a media rights deal worth between, when it's all said and done, 8 and 9 times the previous media rights deal. And if she is able to then secure this CBA agreement, which both sides seem to think will be at 7 years, you're going to have labor peace and a means to grow the sport throughout the remainder of the 2020s. I don't know who you can argue is more responsible from the WNBA side for the growth of women's basketball in this country, with the possible exceptions of David Stern and Val Ackerman. David Stern pushing to create the WNBA and Val Ackerman serving as the first president, and really the template, the platonic ideal for everything that's come since. I think, assuming she secures labor peace here this fall, and I continue to believe she will, someday she will be inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield. That's how I see where Kathy's trajectory is right now. I know there are people who disagree. We'll have to let it play out.
Nope, totally true. Final question. When readers get the book, what is the lingering impression that you want them to have? Just knowing about not only Caitlin Clark, but also just the legacy of Iowa basketball as well.
I want people to appreciate and understand the hard work of people who sometimes into the wind of oppression were able to help grow this sport to get to this point. I want people to also come away understanding the singularity of Caitlin Clark in this moment as well to maximize those things. Please come away from this understanding you don't have to accept the loudest, dumbest arguments as they relate to Caitlin Clark or women's basketball. Please understand that the players are not all out to get Caitlin Clark, while at the same time, they're maybe not the most excited to speak about how much they love Caitlin Clark to a reporter 10 minutes after you just had to go head to head against her for 40 minutes. Please live within the gray area, number one. And number two, like, please find the joy in this. I've heard too many women's basketball fans say, I'm exhausted by the discourse. You don't even need the discourse. You know, I know it's a self-promotional thing to say, but over at the Next, over at the Nine, we cover this in a way that allows us to like dive deep and find the joy in these stories. Just try and enjoy it along the way too. This stuff is supposed to be fun, and if you ignore the bad faith actors, it will be fun.
No, completely agree. I think it's easier than what people realize. Just reading publications like yourselves and also just watching the games. I think it's pretty easy to do.
I was there on Tuesday night, and I saw a sellout crowd at Barclays Center take real joy out of Liberty Fever. And Caitlin didn't even play, but somehow the lead went on, and everyone had a great time. I mean, except Stephanie White watching her defense play in the second half, but that she'll figure it out. She's Stephanie White.
Right.
She's a brilliant basketball mind.
No, completely agree. Howard, thank you very much for spending some time. Can you please let our audience know where they can find the book, where they can find you on social media, where they can find the Nine and the Next as well, and anything else you want to promote as well?
Yes, so Becoming Caitlin Clark is available wherever you get your books. Make sure you take a look. Make sure you follow me on social media, at Howard Megdal Writer on Instagram, and on Blue Sky are kind of the places that I am the most where you can get that book and we can talk about it together. My entire staff over at the Nine Basketball is, powered by the Next. Really just incredible with the coverage we have in every single WNBA market and across college basketball and the history of the sport as well. TheNextHoops.com is where you can go sign up for that. If you become a paid subscriber, it all gets delivered right to your inbox. It's kind of the easiest way to do it. And that would be what I would recommend. And the Nine Sports, THEIX Sports.com, where you have 6 different women's sports. I am our Basketball Wednesday writer, and you can stay on top of the world of women's sports writ large by doing it that way as well. So I can't recommend highly enough reading the folks I get to work with every single day.
Awesome. Howard, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Justin.